Here you are, standing in front of the fridge, again, thinking to yourself, why am I still eating? Because your stomach isn't hungry. In fact, you might already feel full. So why does your brain keep pushing you to eat? Most people assume the answer is simple. They think it's a lack of discipline, a lack of willpower. But if that were true, something strange would have to be happening. Millions of people across different countries, cultures, ages, and lifestyles would all have to be losing their willpower at the exact same time. And that's not what the evidence shows, because when scientists actually study eating behavior, they discover something much more interesting. The reason you can't stop eating when you're full often has very little to do with hunger. It has to do with how your brain, environment, and modern food system interact. And once you understand those three things, your eating habits suddenly make a lot more sense. Let's start with the brain, because the biggest misconception about eating is this. Most people believe that hunger controls how much we eat, but that's not how the brain actually works. Inside your brain are two systems controlling food behavior. The first one is the homeostatic system. This is the system responsible for hunger and fullness. It uses hormones like ghrelin and leptin to regulate energy balance. Ghrelin increases when your body needs food. Leptin signals when you've had enough. In theory, this system should keep your eating perfectly balanced. You get hungry, you eat, you get full, you stop. Simple, except there's a second system in your brain, and it's much more powerful. This system is called the reward system, and it doesn't care whether you need calories, it cares whether something feels good. When you eat something tasty, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is often called the pleasure chemical, but that description is slightly misleading. Dopamine doesn't just create pleasure, it creates motivation. It makes your brain say, that felt good, let's do it again. So even if your stomach signals that you're full, your reward system might still be chasing the experience. And this is where things start to get interesting, because modern food isn't just triggering the reward system accidentally, it's designed to. Something unusual happened in the second half of the 20th century. Around the 1970s, obesity rates across multiple countries began rising at the same time. Different cultures, different lifestyles, different diets. And yet the trend moved in the same direction. If willpower were the cause, we'd have to believe that entire populations suddenly lost self-control simultaneously. But scientists studying food production noticed something else happening during that period. Food itself was changing. Large food companies began investing heavily in research labs, focused on one specific goal, making food irresistible. They studied things most people never think about: texture, flavor intensity, salt and sugar ratios, even sound. Yes, sound. The crunch of a chip, the fizz of a soda, the snap of a chocolate bar. These details are carefully engineered because eating is a multi-sensory experience. But one of the most powerful techniques food scientists discovered is something called vanishing caloric density. It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. Some foods dissolve in your mouth extremely quickly. Think about things like chips, puffed snacks, crackers, chocolate. They feel light when you eat them, almost like they disappear, but calorie-wise, they're extremely dense. Because the food dissolves so quickly, your brain doesn't register how much you've eaten until much later, which means you can eat a large amount before your body sends the signal to stop. In other words, your fullness system is being bypassed, but food engineering isn't the only reason people struggle to stop eating. There's another powerful psychological effect involved, and it starts with something most people have done at least once in their life: dieting. Imagine someone places a big red button in front of you, and then they say, whatever you do, don't press it. Suddenly that button becomes incredibly interesting. You weren't thinking about it before. Now it's all you can think about. Food works exactly the same way. When we label foods as bad, off-limits, or cheat foods, something happens psychologically. The brain perceives scarcity, and scarcity increases value. So when you finally allow yourself to eat that food, your brain reacts as if it might be the last opportunity, which can trigger overeating. Psychologists sometimes call this the what the hell effect. It works like this. Someone eats one cookie they weren't planning to eat. Then their brain says, well, I already messed up. What the hell? And suddenly they eat 5 more. Not because they're hungry, but because the mental rule has already been broken. Ironically, strict dieting often makes overeating more likely, not less, because restriction intensifies the psychological power of food. But there's another reason people eat when they're full, and this one has nothing to do with biology or dieting. It has to do with emotion. If you feel like your brain learned something today, hit like and subscribe so I can keep feeding it videos like this. Food is one of the fastest ways to change how you feel. When you eat something enjoyable, your brain releases chemicals that reduce stress and create comfort. That's why certain foods feel like comfort foods over time. Your brain begins linking food with emotional relief, stress, boredom, loneliness, fatigue. Food becomes a quick way to shift your internal state. So imagine this situation: you finish dinner. Your stomach is full, but you've had a stressful day. Your brain remembers something important. Eating helped earlier, so it suggests eating again. Not because your body needs energy, but because your brain wants the emotional effect. The problem is that food only solves the feeling temporarily. After a short time, the stress or boredom comes back. which can create a loop where eating becomes the default response to emotional discomfort. But there's one more factor that makes stopping difficult, and it's something your brain loves more than almost anything else: patterns. The brain is constantly looking for ways to automate behavior. If you repeat something enough times, the brain builds a shortcut, a habit loop. The loop has three parts: a cue, a behavior, and a reward. For example, watching TV, eating snacks, enjoying the taste. After enough repetitions, the cue alone can trigger the behavior. You sit down on the couch, and suddenly you feel like grabbing snacks, even if you're not hungry. The same thing happens with other routines: dessert after dinner, snacking while working, eating when stressed. These patterns become automatic, which is why people often say things like, "I don't even remember deciding to eat it," because in many cases, the decision was made by a habit loop long before you were aware of it. But here's the important part. Once you understand these systems, something changes, because the behavior that once felt confusing starts to make sense. When you combine everything we've talked about, the picture becomes clearer. Your eating behavior isn't controlled by just one thing. It's influenced by several powerful forces working together. Your brain's reward system pushing for more pleasure, modern foods engineered to bypass fullness signals, psychological restriction making certain foods feel scarce, emotional triggers encouraging comfort eating, and habit loops that automate the entire process. So when someone says, "just use willpower," they're ignoring the reality of how human behavior actually works, because you're not just resisting hunger, you're resisting biology, psychology, environment, and habit all at once. And that's why this experience is so common. Standing in the kitchen, eating something you didn't even plan to eat, wondering why stopping feels harder than it should, but understanding the psychology behind it is powerful, because the moment you see the system clearly, you stop blaming yourself, and you start realizing something important. Your brain isn't broken, it's responding exactly the way it was designed to. Just in a world where food has been designed to outsmart it.